I'm just saying, I'm glad it's not recording right now, you know? Oh, welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Just playing with y'all. You know, I like to make jokes and, you know, have some fun. So, we do have round two. They're playing these games kind of fast, so it's kind of hard to keep up with, to be honest with you. But I at least got 2 videos down. So I do have the round 2 game, Jan-Krzysztof Duda versus Wesley So. So, it's a pretty exciting game. It's pretty straightforward. It's like the craziest game you'll ever see in your life. No, I'm playing. But for all my people in the Philippines, I will say mabuhay to you. Kamusta na aking makaibigan? Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Mabuting pagbati ingat lagi to you. Magandang umaga, magandang hapon. I'm a South Tayo. I just ate my lunch though, so I mean, mag lunch na tayo for me. And anybody who is coming from Poland, I will say Shest and Dziękuję. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But if you guys are ready to go, let's get to it. So, well, I gotta hit that first. Okay, so we got E4. Let me get this hooked up here. Already did it. Okay, cool. So we got E4, E5. Knight comes to F3. We got knight to C6. And knight comes to C3. So this is going to be a little bit different than what you guys normally see. We got knight to F6. And then bishop comes to B5. So some of you guys, like, you know, that have watched my stuff or, you know, are familiar with these types of openings, you guys see that this looks a lot like, you know, the Ruy Lopez. And so this is called the Four Knights game, the Spanish variation. Pretty much Spanish and Ruy Lopez are kind of interchangeable. Like, you know, openings are pretty much called either or. You know, you have a lot of options. I mean, like it says, I mean, it's a 4 knights game, so there's 4 knights. And it does have, you know, that Ruy Lopez look to it, you know, kind of with a Berlin with knight to C3 type situations. And so what we actually see in the game is knight to D4. You know, we have castles by white. You know, you also have the ability after knight to D4, you know, to go ahead and capture the knight here. And it looks kind of crazy after pawn takes. But, you know, it ends up kind of, you know, fizzling to like something pretty like normal. Like, you know, we got E5, pawn takes C3, pawn takes F6, queen takes F6, and then we got pawn, you know, the D pawn taking on C3. And, you know, this is just one way you can do it. But, I mean, this is something that I used to see myself, you know, playing this particular thing. Something else I'll mention. After knight comes to F6 and then bishop to B5, I used to get this position a lot when I was playing. You know, I used to almost always see D6. And I used to get real excited when I saw D6 because I was like, man, you know what? I love this variation. And I literally won like so many. I had like a 65% win percentage when I got to this certain point. So if you follow me real quick, I would push D4. Pawn would take D4. Knight would take D4. And like pretty much always you had to go bishop to D7 because you were looking at like knight takes and pawn takes and bishop takes. And I mean, you were just going to be losing the exchange. So almost every single person went bishop to D7. So in this position, I would castle. And, you know, they try to get tricky. They say, hey, man, let me take knight takes D4. And sometimes people will mess up. I mean, it's not like it's that bad. But sometimes they'll take right here and then allow the bishop to take. And then, you know, the knight takes and stuff like that. So it kind of puts you in a little weird spot. But the key is to take on D7 with check. So I would always do that. Queen would take almost always. Queen would take. And then after bishop to E7, rook to D1 was literally my move. So I started playing this around like 2012, 2013. I actually, you know, got rook to D1. And when I checked in the database, it was a novelty. I was like, man, nobody's ever played it before. So I was happy. I was like, man, if I could graduate to being a 2200 plus, then I can be in the database and this could be my move. Like, I could be the first one to play this. And so literally for like 6 years, nobody played it. And then I checked a couple years ago and somebody played it in 2019. I'm like, it broke my heart. I was really sad. But, you know, after this, you know, usually people would castle and then I could throw E5 at them. And this is really tricky because, you know, you can't take here because the queen's going to take and you're just going to win an entire piece. So almost always you went knight to E8 and bishop to F4. And this is just really, really nice for white. And almost, it's crazy how many people did this. And I would take here. And I mean, this is just a loss for black. Crazy. Anyways, that's my own little personal experience with it. But we do have castles by white. We got C6. And this is almost always going to come when you have a bishop just randomly just like, you know, living on B5. Bishop comes down to C4. We see D6. We got h3. You know, we don't want any bishop to g4 situations because that can be kind of annoying. We have b5, and then we have the novelty of the game, which is bishop to d3. I mean, it kind of makes a lot of sense. I think that it's a novelty because, I mean, you know, you usually probably want to go to b3 or even come all the way back, you know, to e2. You know, even though, you know, you are, you know, allowing the knight to take the bishop, but it's just like you don't really want to block this d pawn. So, I mean, but that's what he did. He said bishop to d3. So, novelty we have. Knight takes f3, queen takes f3. And we have actually reached a point in the game that if you want to pause the video, and there is a top move in the position that Wesley So finds. If you want to pause the video and see if you can guess what he plays here, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So I think the move is really kind of crazy because this isn't generally something that you just do. It basically, the reason why this move is like supposed to get played is because of the lack of development from white, and then the fact that they are blocking their own bishop in. So you have the full ability to play it. So if you were magical and you guessed g5, you'd be absolutely correct. It is like very, very like one of those type of situations where, like, I mean, it's not the most obvious move, clearly, because then you're thinking like, well, where am I going to castle that as black, right? But I mean, really, at the end of the day, black is not worried about that because they're just going full on attack. Like, they are pushing g5. They're about to be pushing h5. They're about to just be ripping this position open, and then the rook is going to swing over, and then black is like castle for what? Like, I'm good. Like, so bishop comes down to e2, and we actually see g4 in the game, but h5 was like absolutely crushing. You are literally taking full advantage of just like the position of white's pieces and the fact that you have a hook here on h3 that you're just going to bust the position wide open. And the king is just like literally just going to be just completely open, and it's going to be sad. So, but we did see g4, which I mean does do the trick, but not quite as heavy. Pawn takes g4, bishop takes g4. We see queen to e3, and then we actually see b4, and this actually hands the advantage back over to white. h5 was still really nice in this position here. But we did have b4. Bishop takes g4. And this is why it's so nice, because it allows white to pretty much like get out of trouble and unwind his pieces. Knight takes on g4. You got queen to h3 attacking the undefended knight. Knight comes back to f6. We see knight to e2. It does give the pawn away, but we see d4. And now, as you guys can see, when you were on like the crazy attack as black, you weren't really caring about your king being in the center, but like you care now because the king is kind of like curiously placed on e8, which is not really where you want to be. Queen comes down to d7, you know, of course, loving a trade. But the queen goes over to f3. We see f5 protecting the knight. We got a3, pawn takes a3, rook comes over to d1. You know, we're anticipating capturing here and pinning that pawn to the queen. Bishop comes to g7, trying to defend against it. Queen takes on a3. We see pawn takes d4. We got f3. Knight comes to c5. We see knight takes d4. So, you know, white is getting some of their material back, but it's actually starting to... It's showing that it's fairly even, but, you know, black is actually kind of starting to get a little bit of an advantage in the moment. So, we see castles by black. Bishop comes to f4. Rook f to d8. We see rook to d2. Knight comes to e6. And now something kind of has to give, man. Because, you know, the knight is attacked twice. And so is this undefended bishop. So, knight takes e6. Queen takes e6. We got c3. Because, you know, we didn't want to see any bishop takes, you know, over here situations. d5. Queen comes to a6. And it is actually, even though it looks kind of crazy, it's really imbalanced. This is triple zeros from what the computer's saying. We all know the computer is crazy. Computer will look at a position that looks like you're about to die and say, no, you're winning. And you're like, what? How am I winning? Like, I'm about to die. Like, so. Anyways, we have d4. Rook comes to e2. And this is a nice little, like, side move. You know, just trying to throw in a little attack on the queen. Forcing the queen to move. So we see queen to d5. We see king over to h2. Just being extra safe. We got d3. Rook comes up to e7. So now we got to work on the 7th. Rook sidesteps over to e8 to challenge the rook on the 7th. And before we get into what is played in the game, there is actually, as crazy as it sounds, it has shifted to where there's actually a win in the position for white. So go ahead and pause the video for a second time and see if you can spot this win. Okay, so it might seem like, okay, you know, white is down a pawn, you know, like not only that, but they have this pass pawn for black. Like, there's no way that white can be okay here, right? Absolutely wrong. Like I said, there is a movement of position that gives white +2 of an advantage, which usually almost always can get pushed into a win between these types of players. You know, rook A to E1 is what was played in the game, but that was not the move. If we back up again, rook to A5 is the move. And this is really, really, really inconvenient for this queen because now this queen doesn't have very many options of places to go, right? So the problem is the queen is going to have to back up. You know, you pretty much can either back up or, I mean, you were going to have to either go to like B3 or something. And I mean, queen would take, or even queen could come, like, I mean, oh, not there, take. And, you know, you're looking pretty iffy. So queen would probably come back to D8 to try to do the most defense. Rook would take on E8, queen would take on D8. You'd see queen to C4 with check. King would sidestep to H8. And then now you have queen takes D3. And so white has managed to equal up their pawns. And the biggest issue that black has in the position is these pawns. They're all weak. They're all individual pawns. And like you automatically have this pawn that's going to be dropping soon. You know, you can throw a check in here, but I mean, you're going to be able to sidestep that down this way. And you're just sitting pretty. You know, there are some little bit of diagonal weaknesses because of this bishop. And I mean, like I said, these are all individual pawns that are just like really, really horrible. So if black didn't have like get the attack that he got, you know, you definitely as black have some major issues in your position, like major weaknesses. So. But that is not what we saw. We actually saw rook A to E1. And so this allows black basically to get the advantage again. Rook takes E7, rook takes E7. You have bishop to F6. Inconveniently throwing an attack on this rook. The rook swings back down to E1. And now this pass pawn is like 1000% live. D2. Rook to D1. This is not where you want your rook. You do not want your rook just sitting behind a pawn and like basically can't move. So bishop comes to E5. Black is thinking, let's trade pieces. Let's trade, like, you know, you could take here, I could take, you know, it's just bad, right? So queen comes down to A4, trying to like hold the bishop and like, you know, not trade and stuff. But we actually have the really, really nice move queen to B5. And this is actually really, really annoying. Because it's trying to encourage a trade of queens. And so, you know, we actually see white play queen to A2 with check, which is like, you love to be able to see checks in these types of positions. But let's say, for example, white did actually go into a trade. Then unfortunately, you'd actually see bishop takes F4 with check first as a nice little, you know, Zwischenzug move. And then after G3, you would actually just take on B5, and then the pawn would take on F4. And then you'd have rook to D8. And you have some major problems in this position. These two pawns are pretty much just like one pawn. Like, this one pawn is equal to these two pawns. Not only that, but you are up an entire pawn as black. So you're going to see, you know, probably king to G1. A5 is going to come. And so you have some issues with these pawns rolling. And then after king to G2, king to G7, king down to F1, you got H5. You have too much space between all of these different pawns. And, I mean, you're not really able to come up like this because, I mean, you're going to just be pushing here. And the problem is, if you try to go into this right here and do this, your king is way too far away to do anything for this pawn. And that's why it makes it so hard. So, yes, we saw, like I said, queen to A2 with check. King came over to H8. We saw bishop to G3. Oh, wait, no, we didn't. I'm going into my own variation. Sorry. Queen went to A2 with check. King sidestepped over to H8. And it is actually in this position that Jan-Krzysztof Duda did resign the game. Now, going into the variation I was accidentally playing, the reason why is the best move in a position by what the computer thinks is queen to E6. Which, I'm going to be honest with you, I honestly don't know what the point of this move is. It's just like dropping your bishop completely. But, I mean, there's not a lot better. The variation that I was going with was actually bishop back to G3. That looked like it made any sense. And then after bishop takes G3, king takes G3, and then you have the really nasty F4 check. And now the problem is black is willingly giving up a pawn so that you can take, and then now your king is just like wide open. There's like no retreat for your king whatsoever. And so most likely you're going to go down like this. But, I mean, you got these checks coming. I mean, where do you go? Like, I mean, you got something like this, and then the rook swings over, and it's just like, nah. Like, this sucks, man. So, I mean, that's pretty much what... That's just one example of a variation that Krzysztof Duda was looking at when he was looking at the position. So, yes. Very interesting game. But I'll go ahead and get these good mornings. Well, people in the Philippines... so maayong buntag, mayad na agahan, naibag na biga, masantos ya kabason, marhe na aga, buenos dias, maayong aga, mapia na uma, kapian kapano dios, mayapa abak, mayad na aga, mapia agay, mapia kapa pizza, my big abukla, marajana buntag, marya may nat, malpena aga, kasanyang gansi LOB, salam, assalamu alaikum, merci to you. Appreciate you guys very much. I'm glad I'm shooting through those crazy fast. It's getting like good in here. So, in this game, it looked like Malakas C. Wesley So. So he got his win. He's doing actually pretty good. He's in the top of the pack right now. But I mean, of course, you know, he's probably disappointed that he's not first. But anyway, I will see you guys next time.